people are doing. So, well, it's time for this very interesting comparison. It doesn't even feel like a comparison because just it's a weird situation. Think about it. The iPhone 15 Pro Max in India, it costs significantly more than even double the OnePlus 11. It's close to 3 times the price. Very close. And that's ridiculous. There is no way in all hell combined that the iPhone is 3 times better a device, much less a camera, as opposed to the OnePlus 11. That's just not the case. But yeah, the comparison has still gotta happen because I still want to know which one is actually better as a camera, and I think it's gonna be way closer than you might imagine, especially if you're looking at just the price tag. I mean, come on. It's already a main camera, not a particularly simple image because this was late afternoon, almost during sunset, and you can see the sunlight was just orange. It's not even yellow, it's orange. And I think the OnePlus is doing a better job, right at the start. The OnePlus takes a little lead. It's not really the biggest deal in the world, but again, think about the prices. It's the biggest deal in the world if the OnePlus starts off strong. Now in this backlit shot, well, both are performing almost equally as well. I think the OnePlus in general just processes the image more. It gives you more dynamic range, more detail in the shadows. While the iPhone, it gives you a lot more contrast. Now personally speaking, I like the contrast more. It's just the way I am. I do think the OnePlus once again preserves the warmth of the scene much more. I mean, you can tell that with just how low the sun is, this was very warm, and I think the OnePlus 11 looks just balanced enough to look right, as opposed to the iPhone, which is compensating a bit too much, in my opinion at least. But the biggest issue on the iPhone, not the OnePlus, the iPhone, is that it cannot really focus on close-up subjects. You can see how close the OnePlus 11 can get. Not the case on the iPhone. I don't really know why. This was a problem on the iPhone 14 Pro as well, far as I can remember, and that's not been fixed. It's really not looking good, especially at the start for the iPhone here. Then the ultrawide camera, and the ultrawide looks great on both. I don't really have anything to complain about. At least in this shot, I think both are doing a phenomenal job. Even the warmth on the iPhone looks really nice, which is definitely better than what the main camera is performing. But then this backlit shot, now this is where I think the OnePlus is doing a slightly better job. Now personally, I really like high contrast shots, no doubt about that, but yeah, the iPhone is a little too crushed in this case. Maybe it's because it's the ultrawide camera and it couldn't really gather enough light. Whatever the case, I think the OnePlus is taking a lead here. And then of course the ultrawide also comes with macro on both. And the iPhone is actually better in this case because I think the iPhone is one of the best for macro because technically speaking, you can get the closest with it as opposed to something like the OnePlus, which, you gotta stay a little bit farther off and you can't really get as much of a macro shot as you can with the iPhone. Also, this time around the white balance is perfect on the iPhone as opposed to the OnePlus, which is overcompensating a lot because I did use a warm light in this scene. Now then 2x zoom. See, 2x is gonna be great on OnePlus because it is a 32 megapixel fairly high quality sensor and it is optical zoom. The iPhone on the other hand, it has the best sensor crop that I've ever seen on any smartphone, and so naturally it's also extremely good. And basically, as long as you have a fairly nice amount of light, you're gonna get incredible shots. I mean, this was late during the day, and even then the shots are just flawless on both. Now this 5x shot, it is slightly backlit. I just really like the way this particular scene looked, but regardless, I think both are doing a fantastic job. And yes, of course the iPhone has more detail because it's 5x optical zoom as opposed to the OnePlus, which has to crop in quite a bit from the 2x camera. But despite that, I think 5x on the OnePlus at least, it looks fairly comparable. Not as good as the optical on the iPhone, of course, but fairly comparable. At 10x, of course, this is where the iPhone is going to take a lead, and it is really conserving those highlights. I mean, just check it out, just how much of a difference there is in the dynamic range between the OnePlus and the iPhone. That's quite impressive. Now then, high resolution. See, before we get to the details, one thing that I just have to point it out. The colors on the iPhone look so off. It's not just it's desaturated. Yeah, the greens look fine, but it's the warm tones. The street, the greatest example, it looks like complete oddity on the iPhone as opposed to a OnePlus, which, yeah, it is saturating more than the iPhone, but it is also maintaining really good and proper color on the street. But of course, cropping in and, yeah, The iPhone has significantly more detail, and that's something I expected because the OnePlus, although it has a lot of high-res options, and we'll get to those in the moment, but even with the main camera, the high-res doesn't really work out quite as well as opposed to the iPhone, which, well, it does work out on the iPhone's case. Now the ultrawide, again, the OnePlus has high-res ultrawide, but yeah, I just, the color of the street is really bothering me at this point. It's very off-putting, on the iPhone that is. But anyways, when we zoom in, the problem on the OnePlus, as I mentioned before, the high-res options are there, but they don't really do anything. That's kind of my problem, because the iPhone's 12 megapixel ultrawide can take just as good and basically just as detailed shots as the OnePlus 11's 48 megapixel ultrawide. Which, on paper it doesn't make sense, but it's just the way it is. I don't really know why. Now for 2x, again 32 megapixels on the OnePlus 11, and this is a sensor crop on the iPhone 15 Pro Max, so technically speaking, OnePlus should lead by a mile. But as you would have expected at this point, it is not how things go down, because the iPhone is almost just as detailed as the OnePlus 11. Again, sensor crop versus high resolution optical zoom. It is a very good testament to just how good the detail quality can be on the iPhone, but it is also kind of sad to see that the OnePlus just doesn't really work well with high resolution. I wish it did. I know it's a niche feature, but still. And of course, one other thing the iPhone has is that it can produce 24 megapixel main camera shots, and that's very important because every other device, including the OnePlus 11, is always going to bin it down to 12 megapixels. And yeah, I guess the shot in this case isn't particularly good on the iPhone because it's once again crushing shadows way too much. Like, I like contrast, but that's not high contrast, that's crushed shadows. There's a big difference, I think you can tell. As for details, yeah, obviously, the 24 megapixels on the iPhone, they work. They produce incredible amounts of detail. And the OnePlus isn't horrible, considering that this is a 500% crop, but if this is a detail difference between the main camera regular shots that you're gonna take on a regular basis, well, I think it's gonna stack up a fair bit. Now for selfies, well, you see, I don't mind how the OnePlus 11 looks, not really, but I drastically prefer how the iPhone looks, like especially in this case. It really works out for me because I don't even need to explain it. It's got so much better contrast, it doesn't look as flat, and the colors are on point. It looks really nice. Simple as that. But well, in this backlit situation, the one good thing about the OnePlus is that it is sort of conserving the highlight in the background just a pinch better, but everything else about the iPhone is better. Like, the skin tones are perfect, and you can tell that there is no weird brightening going on my face like on the OnePlus. The contrast is impeccable, and if you know anything about me, you know that I appreciate good contrast. Well, as for portraits, and it's a similar situation, just look at the contrast on the iPhone. You can really tell where the light is coming from, and you can get the proper contours on the face. That's not the case on the OnePlus 11. I look kind of like I'm made of porcelain, which I don't really appreciate, I guess. And the backlit portrait, yeah, this is just where the OnePlus 11 falls apart, because that's just... yeah, that's not gonna work. I don't even need to say anything here because it's plenty visible. I did take another slightly offset backlit, not quite as directly backlit by the sun as the previous one, but it's the same result. It's a problem with the processing that really doesn't work out with the portraits. And night selfies. See, it's a little interesting here because both phones have some significant issues, and let's just get to it. The iPhone, yeah, you can tell it uses this front-facing flash that you cannot turn off when it's like fairly low light, like in this case was, and it looks ridiculous. That's just the color of my skin, the fact that my black t-shirt is not black anymore. And then the OnePlus 11, on the other hand, yeah, it has significantly less detail because it didn't use a flash, so I guess that's fine. But also just how ridiculously crushed the shadows look, that just doesn't really work once again for me. Now for regular rear camera portraits, and I think that the OnePlus is very close to the iPhone in this case, which is a pretty big deal because the iPhone, in my opinion, especially when you're taking regular daylight shots, like, the portraits look impeccable. The OnePlus has slightly higher contrast, and I do think that I prefer the iPhone by just a hair in this case, because it is controlling the highlight on my face a pinch better. That's just it. Now for this backlit portrait, yeah, we see the same problem as we saw with the selfies. You can tell there's a halo of excessive brightness on my face, and yeah, I don't even look like an Indian anymore, which that can have its perks in some places, but yeah, not over here. Anyways, let's move on to 2x. Now 2x is good on both. Like, you can get really nice and very detailed shots. I kind of like the slightly higher contrast in general on the OnePlus, but the face, man, like, why is my face so unnecessarily bright and white? It looks weird and pale. The iPhone, on the other hand, with the face, it looks right. The contrast looks really nice, and I really appreciate that, as you might have guessed. Now you can also take 5x portraits on the iPhone. Now it's a little difficult to take because your photographer has to stand way back, like you can barely even see them. It's not that bad, but anyways, this obviously I'm comparing it against the 2x on the OnePlus 11, and yeah, the 2x on the OnePlus 11, in this case at least, it looks nice. It's not too bad. I do think, in general, I prefer the skin tones on the iPhone a little bit more. Now for night portraits, I think the iPhone takes it. Simple reason, it has a little bit more detail, slightly better control over the warm light that was falling on my face. It's a very dim warm light, but it was a very warm light too. So that control is really nice to see. It just is a better balanced image, so to speak. See, I really wanted to test out how well these phones would perform against each other indoors. I did take an outdoor shot like this one, and there's two major issues on both phones. Actually, one on each, rather. Anyways, the point is that the iPhone, it's a little too dark in a lot of the shadows, way too dark. The OnePlus, on the other hand, it's got a lot of noise, like a significant amount of noise, and a lot of artifacting in the sky. The sky on the iPhone looks flawless. It is a perfect gradient. After you do compression, you might not be able to see the problems I'm talking about on the OnePlus, but believe me, they're all there. Now then, indoors. Now these are way lower light than anything you'd get outdoors, so it's really gonna test the limits. Apparently this wasn't enough because both phones are essentially flawless here. I mean, it looks incredible on both. I don't really have any complaints. The details are perfect. It's great. Let's move on. Now this, you see, this one I would consider it to be borderline ultra low light because man, you can probably tell that there was basically no light except for whatever the light was in the background. Like that's a little bit more salt on the wound, so to speak. And I think both are doing fairly well. I do like the colors on the OnePlus a pinch more. I think it's just because the iPhone looks a little desaturated, in my opinion. But yeah, otherwise, the detail levels, all the important stuff, the noise reduction, it's basically fantastic on both. Now, close-ups, same problem at night. With the iPhone, you really can't get close enough. The OnePlus does a phenomenal job, as you can tell. And yeah, it's really unfortunate because the iPhone sensor is really nice, but you can't really take advantage of it like you can on the OnePlus. Now for the ultrawide, see, the OnePlus 11, I believe it has a slightly larger sensor as opposed to the iPhone. And well, in a case like this, when there's not terribly low lighting conditions, both are gonna be very close. I do think that the iPhone has more contrast, which I personally like, but the OnePlus is not far off and it is doing a phenomenal job, especially with the fact that it is giving us similar levels of low noise with more shadow detail. Now see, this shot right here, this is where I think the OnePlus just cements its lead with the ultrawide, at least in low light conditions, because just take a look at it. It's a flawless shot on the OnePlus, and not the case on the iPhone. It's unfortunate, but that's just the case. There's just no noise on the OnePlus, which is what surprised me more than anything else. Like, that's incredible. Now, if you want to use zoom, you do get the option for 2x sensor crop on the iPhone and a 2x optical on the OnePlus, of course. As long as you have some amount of light in there, it's not horribly dark, the OnePlus can actually do a significantly better job because it's not forced to use a sensor crop, which would inherently cause issues with lighting. And the detail level and the sheer low levels of noise on the OnePlus is quite impressive here. Now for 5x, see, this is where the iPhone really comes in, because even at low light, it is able to use the 5x periscope camera, or rather the tetra prism camera. I don't think it's a periscope, but regardless. The point is that it can use that telephoto camera instead of a 5x crop, which you would expect in most cases from the main camera. And the reason for that is that it has a very wide aperture, and that really allows it to gather a whole boatload of light. It really shows you can get an incredibly detailed result here. So anyways, that is a wrap for this comparison, and I gotta tell you, man, this is way too close for just how far apart the prices are on both these phones. It's just, it's really sad that the iPhone, it's good, alright? I'll tell you this much, the iPhone 15 Pro Max has probably the best iPhone camera that I've ever used, for obvious reasons. It's also because Apple fixed some of the biggest issues, like the HDR issue that we had for 3 whole generations before the 15. It's gone. It's perfect now. It looks incredible in basically any shot that I've taken thus far. You saw it yourself. But fact is, the OnePlus never even had that issue. They could produce incredible dynamic range in almost any shot, and let's just face it, except for like some small issues like with the selfie portraits and this, the portraits and all that jazz, I think it kept up more than well enough. In a lot of cases, it even pulled ahead, which is quite something, considering that it is almost 3 times less expensive. Almost. But hey, it does count. Anyways, I'll be seeing you guys soon enough with many more videos to come. Cheers.